Have you ever found yourself making an impulsive decision and then immediately wondered, "What was I thinking?" Don't worry, you're not alone. The human mind is full of tricks and psychological traps that can deceive us and lead us to make wrong choices. In this video, we will explore 15 mental traps you should avoid at all costs. If you want to learn how to identify when someone is trying to manipulate you, make smarter decisions, and avoid common mistakes that everyone makes, keep watching. In just 15 minutes, you'll discover how your mind might be sabotaging you. But before we start, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to be alerted about more high-value content like this and to expand your knowledge about personal finance, success, money, and wealth. Let's get started. Mind Trap 1: Confirmation Bias. Confirmation bias is a common mental trap that leads us to seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. When we are stuck in this bias, we tend to ignore or downplay information that contradicts our beliefs. This prevents us from seeing the whole picture and making informed decisions. For example, imagine you believe a particular investment is foolproof. You only look for positive reviews and avoid articles or opinions suggesting risks. As a result, you ignore warning signs that could have prevented a bad decision. To avoid this trap, it's essential to actively seek out contradictory information and be willing to revise your beliefs based on new evidence. How to avoid it? Question your own beliefs and seek out information that challenges your point of view. Be willing to change your mind when confronted with new evidence. Mind Trap 2: Availability Heuristic. The availability heuristic is a trap that leads us to judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. When an idea or event is more easily remembered, we tend to believe it is more common or likely, even if that is not the case. For example, after watching several news reports about plane crashes, you may overestimate the frequency of these accidents and develop an irrational fear of flying, even though statistics show it's much safer than driving. To avoid this trap, it's important to understand that the frequency with which an event is discussed or portrayed in the media does not necessarily reflect its actual probability. How to avoid it? Base your decisions on real data and statistics, rather than relying solely on examples that come easily to mind. Mind Trap 3: Anchoring Effect. The anchoring effect is a mental trap that occurs when we latch onto an initial piece of information, the anchor, and use it as a reference point for making subsequent decisions. Even if the anchor is irrelevant or misleading, it can significantly influence our judgment. For example, if you see a product on sale for $1,000 and then find a discount that reduces it to $700, you may think it's a great deal, even if the product was never worth $1,000. The initial anchor of $1,000 distorted your perception of value. To avoid this trap, it's important to recognize when you are being influenced by an anchor and try to assess information independently. How to avoid it? Always question the validity of the initial information and look for other points of reference before making a decision. Mind Trap 4: Sunk Cost Fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is a mental trap where we continue to invest in something just because we have already invested significant resources, such as time, money, or effort, even if it is no longer advantageous to continue. For example, imagine you bought expensive tickets for a show, but on the day of the event, you realize you're no longer interested. Even so, you decide to go because you've already spent the money. The sunk cost fallacy prevents you from making a rational decision based on the present and the best available options. To avoid this trap, focus on the future and potential benefits rather than clinging to past costs. How to avoid it? Evaluate each decision based on its current and future merits, rather than focusing on what has already been spent or lost. Mind Trap 5: Hindsight Bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to believe after the fact that an event was predictable or inevitable, when in fact it was not. This trap leads us to overestimate our ability to predict events and underestimate the uncertainty of the future. For example, after a financial market crash, you might think you always knew it would happen, even if you had done nothing to prepare. Hindsight bias distorts our perception of learning from past events and prevents us from recognizing the complexity and uncertainty inherent in life. To avoid this trap, it's important to remember that the future is always uncertain, and that many things only seem obvious after they happen. How to avoid it? Accept the uncertainty of the future and recognize that past events were not as predictable as they seem in hindsight. Mind Trap 6. Gambler's Fallacy. The gambler's fallacy is the erroneous belief that past random events influence future events, especially in games of chance. This trap leads us to believe that if something has happened frequently over a short period, it is less likely to happen in the future or vice versa. For example, if a coin has been flipped and landed on heads 5 times in a row, you may mistakenly believe there is a higher chance it will land on tails next time. In reality, the probability remains the same with each flip. To avoid this trap, it's important to understand that random events are independent of each other. How to avoid it? Recognize that each random event is independent and not influenced by past events. Base your decisions on real probabilities, not erroneous assumptions. Mind Trap 7. Bandwagon Effect. The bandwagon effect is a mental trap where people tend to adopt behaviors, styles, and attitudes simply because others are doing the same. This tendency to follow the crowd can lead to irrational or harmful decisions, especially when choices are made without critical consideration. For example, you might buy shares in a company just because everyone around you is buying them, without doing your own research or considering the company's fundamentals. The bandwagon effect can create speculative bubbles and lead to significant losses when collective enthusiasm fades. To avoid this trap, it's important to rely on your own analysis and judgment. How to avoid it? Do your own research and make decisions based on solid information and analysis, rather than blindly following what everyone else is doing. Now think about this. Have you ever thought about earning between $5,000 and $10,000 per month as extra income by creating simple videos for YouTube like this one? I have a complete and straightforward course that I developed for a single payment of $29.90. $29.90 won't make you poorer or richer, but what if this program works for you? Well, the link is in the first pinned comment of the video and in the About section of the channel, okay? If you're interested, just click the link to know more. But now, back to the content. Mind Trap 8. Overconfidence Bias. Overconfidence bias is the tendency to overestimate our abilities, knowledge, or ability to predict events. This trap can lead to risky decisions and underestimation of challenges, resulting in mistakes and failures. For example, an investor might believe they have superior market knowledge and, as a result, make risky bets without adequately considering the risks. Overconfidence can blind us to our own limitations and lead us to make reckless decisions. To avoid this trap, it is essential to be realistic about your abilities and seek feedback and advice from others. How to avoid it? Recognize your own limitations and be open to learning from others. Make a realistic assessment of the risks before making important decisions. Mind Trap 9. Loss Aversion. Loss aversion is a mental trap in which the pain of losing something is perceived as more intense than the pleasure of gaining the same thing. This leads us to make decisions that avoid losses, even if the decisions are not rational or in our best interest in the long term. For example, you may hold on to a falling investment just because you're afraid to realize a loss, even though selling and investing in something else might be the best decision. Loss aversion can paralyze us and prevent us from taking actions that could ultimately benefit us more. To avoid this trap, it is important to focus on long-term prospects and logic, rather than being guided by the fear of loss. How to avoid it? Evaluate decisions based on their future merits, rather than focusing solely on the fear of losses. Remember that taking calculated risks is part of growth and success. Mind Trap 10. Status Quo Bias. Status quo bias is a tendency to prefer things to remain the same and resist change, even when change could be beneficial. This trap can lead us to make decisions that maintain the current state rather than exploring new opportunities. For example, you might hesitate to change jobs, even if your current job is not making you happy, because the unknown seems scarier than known dissatisfaction. Status quo bias keeps us in our comfort zone and prevents us from growing and thriving. To avoid this trap, it is important to be open to change and evaluate options with an open mind. How to avoid it? Ask yourself if your decisions are being guided by fear of change or by logic. Be willing to step out of your comfort zone and explore new opportunities. Mind Trap 11. Framing Effect. The framing effect is a mental trap that occurs when our decisions are influenced by how information is presented, rather than the content of the information itself. Different framings of the same information can lead to different interpretations and decisions. For example, if a doctor says a surgery has a 90% success rate, you are likely to feel more positive about it than if he says there is a 10% chance of failure, even though the information is the same. The framing effect can distort our perception and lead us to make decisions based on presentation rather than facts. To avoid this trap, it is essential to look at the facts objectively and consider all angles. How to avoid it? Examine information from different perspectives and try to understand the full context before making a decision. Be skeptical of how information is presented and focus on the objective data. Mind Trap 12. Endowment Effect. The endowment effect is the tendency to value more what we already own compared to what we do not own. This trap leads us to place excessive value on our own possessions and to make emotional decisions based on attachment rather than logic. For example, you might refuse to sell a used car at market value because you feel it is worth more, simply because it is yours. The endowment effect can prevent us from making rational financial decisions and taking advantage of good opportunities. To avoid this trap, it is important to evaluate things objectively and be willing to let go when necessary. How to avoid it? Evaluate your assets and possessions objectively and be willing to let them go when it is the most financially intelligent decision. Recognize when emotional attachment is influencing your decisions. Mind Trap 13. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a mental trap that occurs when we try to reconcile two conflicting beliefs or attitudes. When confronted with information that contradicts our beliefs, we tend to experience discomfort and try to reduce this dissonance, often by denying or ignoring new information. For example, if you strongly believe that a particular investment is safe but receive evidence that it is risky, you may dismiss or downplay this information to maintain your original belief. Cognitive dissonance prevents us from accepting new information and changing our minds. To avoid this trap, it is essential to be open to new information and willing to change beliefs when necessary. How to avoid it? Be willing to recognize and accept information that contradicts your beliefs. Practice mental flexibility and be open to adjusting your beliefs based on new evidence. Mind Trap 14. Groupthink. Groupthink is a mental trap where people in a group tend to agree with each other to maintain harmony, avoiding conflict. This conformity can lead to irrational and harmful decisions as dissenting opinions are suppressed or ignored. For example, in a work environment, you might hesitate to express a contrary opinion during a meeting for fear of causing disagreement or being seen as a troublemaker. Groupthink can result in one-sided decisions and a lack of innovation. To avoid this trap, it is important to encourage diversity of opinions and create an environment where people feel comfortable expressing their ideas. How to avoid it? Promote an environment where diversity of opinions is valued and encouraged. Do not be afraid to challenge the group's consensus and offer alternative perspectives. Mind Trap 15. Recency Effect. The recency effect is the tendency to give more importance to recent information or events than to past events. This trap can lead to decisions based on limited information and make us forget important lessons from the past. For example, after watching a series of reports about an increase in crime, you might start to believe that crime is out of control, even if statistics show a long-term trend of decline. The recency effect can distort our perception of reality and lead us to make hasty decisions. To avoid this trap, it is important to consider the entire history of information and not be overly influenced by recent events. How to avoid it? Evaluate information and events in the context of a longer period and consider all the evidence before making decisions. Do not let recent events distort your perception of reality. These 15 mental traps are common to all of us, but that does not mean we are destined to fall into them. By recognizing these traps and understanding how they influence our decisions, we can begin to take steps to avoid them and improve our decision-making. Remember, self-awareness is the key to avoiding these mistakes and living a more conscious and successful life. Did you like the video? Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments which of these mental traps you have already noticed in your life. See you in the next video, where we will continue to explore ways to improve your mindset and achieve personal and financial success.